The Detroit Lions may have just made the most shocking mistake of the offseason. Cutting former first-round cornerback Terrion Arnold could come back to haunt this franchise if he walks onto another NFL field and proves Detroit was wrong all along.
Saw this earlier this morning. Dave Burkett of the Detroit Free Press reporting on the hearing in Florida on whether or not free agent cornerback Terrion Arnold will be required to wear a GPS device while he's on home confinement, awaiting trial on 8 different felony charges. It all arises from that armed robbery and kidnapping that happened in February. I may have mentioned earlier in this week the item in The Athletic that takes a close look at everything that happened, allegedly or actually. The only question is whether or not Terrion Arnold knew what these other folks were doing, because the text messages make it clear somebody was doing something in an effort to recover the property that had been stolen from the Airbnb that Terrion Arnold had rented. The items stolen included $100,000 in cash that he had planned to play blackjack and roulette with at the Hard Rock Casino. I guess the end result's the same. He lost the money. He just lost it in a much more immediate and direct way. So one of the lingering questions had been, who are the interested teams? Because if he's on a team, then the requirement to wear the GPS device shouldn't attach. That's why the judge initially ruled that he shouldn't have to wear it. Reluctantly, but the judge ruled, playing football, doesn't have to wear it. He's on home confinement, and that's that. Once the Lions cut him, the prosecution said, hey, he's not on a team. He should wear the device like everybody else on home confinement. All we talk about is the possibility he ends up on paid leave if he signs with a team, but that is risk number one if you sign him. Do you sign him one day and have him placed on paid leave the next, unable to practice or play with the team? I personally think no one's going to sign him until he resolves these charges in a way that means he's free and clear and able to play. Now, he could very well be suspended at some point, but I just find it hard to believe, because he's not a guy that's lived up to his first-round potential. You know, it's coincidental, not ironic, but coincidental that both the Colts and the Jets are among the 4 teams, because Sauce Gardner, the former Jet, now member of the Colts, he was an All-Pro his first 2 seasons. If Arnold had played that way, he'd still be on the Lions, period. And if they had cut him and he had played that way, he'd already be on another team, but they wouldn't have cut him. So that's a factor too. It's the sliding scale. If you're good enough, you overcome any of these off-field issues. If you're not, the off-field issues become an impediment to your career.
Or if what happened with the judge, and the judge says you can do football-related activities, then you jump into practice right away, especially for a team that is bereft of cornerbacks. Sean, look, I like Brad Holmes. I like the Lions regime a lot. I do think that they will win a Super Bowl here by the time it is all said and done. I honestly believe that in my heart. This TA move and the releasing of him, it made me scratch my head when it happened. And the longer this goes and the more you hear, Sean, if he wiggles his way out of this and he goes right back to the NFL, I'll be a little upset, man. I will. I'm not going to lie to you.
You know what I have to ask myself? I have to ask myself if there's something deeper going on here. Maybe there's a culture issue. I don't know. I don't know. And do you know why I come to that conclusion? Because of exactly what you just said. Maybe there are things that are going on that we're not aware of. Okay? Maybe there are some flags. And now, am I speculating? Absolutely, I'm speculating. But to your point, Neil, it doesn't make sense at face value, right? If this guy gets off, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I said it day one, watching that thing, and it might be that his lawyer was putting on a show.
Yeah.
Boy, it sure looked flimsy to me.
Yeah.
It sure looked flimsy to me. And I wasn't saying that as a Lion fan, and he's guilty, and he's not guilty because I'm a Lions fan. It looked flimsy to me. Maybe there's something bigger going on. I don't know, because at face value, Neil, I tend to agree with you. It don't make sense.
I don't know.
It don't make sense.
It seemed like typical Lions to me, because they don't like headaches like this. They don't like this type of media attention. They waited to see how the pre-trial was going to play out, but I think their minds were already made up. We're going to cut them. We're going to save our losses, and we're going to move.
And you're probably right, KG. And I've always talked about this. And when I talk to my kids about sports sometimes, like my older kids, and because we got into a conversation about this, and I think what the Lions decided, and it always comes back to this in the NFL, it always comes back to, is your production worth more than the headache?
For sure, but does Terrion Arnold in any way like swing games for the Lions? Like them not having TA cost them a game or two this season? I'm not of that belief.
No,
I was a huge TA supporter,
yeah,
and known supporter, but yeah.
No, he doesn't swing games. Like, he's not, I just got done saying, like, he's not an impact guy that's going to swing a game your way, but I do believe he can be a part of a winning defensive back. I do believe
and
that.
he's a need right now.
No,
and
he is
above
right
all
now,
else,
sure.
he's a need right now.
That is a fact.
Woodward Sports chat thread. I'm salty. I was rooting for him, but not anymore. The moral of the story, I say all of this to say this. If he catches on somewhere else and he's productive, I'll be pissed.
No, I feel that.
The Detroit Lions may have just made the most dangerous decision of their entire offseason. Because if Terrion Arnold walks onto another NFL field, proves everyone wrong, and becomes the cornerback Detroit believed he could be, this move could follow this franchise for years. A former first-round pick, a player drafted to become part of Detroit's defensive future, gone. And now the question echoing across the NFL is simple. Did the Lions protect their culture, or did they accidentally throw away a future star? The situation became even more complicated after reports surrounding Arnold's legal case created uncertainty about his NFL future. According to reports, Arnold appeared in a Florida hearing regarding whether he would need to wear a GPS monitoring device while on home confinement awaiting trial on multiple felony charges connected to an alleged armed robbery and kidnapping incident. The biggest question surrounding the case has never only been about the accusations themselves. It has been about one thing. What did Terrion Arnold actually know? Because that answer could completely change how the NFL views his future. And while the legal process continues, Detroit already made its decision. They walked away. But now the football world is asking, was Detroit too quick to close the door? And that question leads directly into the biggest problem facing Arnold right now. The NFL has always operated under one brutal rule. If you are talented enough, teams will find a way to make room for you. That is the reality of professional football. Elite players receive second chances. Elite players receive patience. Elite players receive opportunities. But for players who have not reached that superstar level yet, every mistake becomes heavier. And that is where Terrion Arnold's situation becomes complicated. Arnold entered Detroit with massive expectations after being selected in the first round. The Lions believed they were getting a cornerstone defensive back, someone who could eventually become the face of their secondary. But the reality is, Arnold had not yet reached that level. He was still developing. He was still learning. He was still trying to prove he belonged among the NFL's best corners. And that creates the biggest debate. Was Detroit willing to give up on potential too early? Because history shows teams regret moving on from young talent too quickly. But history also shows teams regret ignoring warning signs. This is where the Lions' philosophy comes into focus. Detroit has built its identity around discipline, accountability, and eliminating distractions. Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have repeatedly created a culture where the team comes before the individual. And from that perspective, the decision becomes understandable. But football is not played on paper. Football is judged by results. And if Arnold succeeds somewhere else, that is when the conversation becomes explosive. Because then everyone will ask, Did Detroit make the right move, or did they create their own nightmare? The biggest question now is not only about Detroit, it is about the rest of the NFL. Because teams are always searching for cornerback help. And if Arnold receives clearance to participate in football activities, suddenly the equation changes. A desperate team with secondary problems could decide. Maybe the reward is worth the risk. But that decision comes with serious questions. Would a team sign him and then immediately lose him to a suspension? Would he be available for training camp? Would he actually help them during the season? Those are the questions every general manager must answer. Because NFL decisions are not based only on talent. They are based on timing. And right now, timing is working against Arnold. The interesting part is that teams reportedly connected to him include franchises that understand the value of elite cornerback play. Teams that know what a shutdown defensive back can mean. And that creates an uncomfortable comparison. Look at players who become immediate stars at cornerback. When a player reaches that level, teams find ways to keep them. But when a player is still trying to prove himself, uncertainty becomes much harder to overcome. That is the harsh reality of the NFL. Production creates forgiveness. Potential creates patience. But inconsistency creates doubt. And that brings us back to Detroit. The Detroit Lions are no longer the old Lions. This franchise has rebuilt itself around one powerful idea. No distraction is bigger than the team. That mentality helped transform Detroit from a struggling organization into a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And that is why this decision matters. Because the Lions were not simply cutting a player. They were making a statement. They were saying, our standards are higher than talent alone. But here is where the debate becomes complicated. Because cornerback is not a position where teams can easily replace talent. Detroit needs defensive backs. Detroit needs playmakers. Detroit needs young players who can grow with this roster. And Terrion Arnold represented exactly that possibility. Maybe he was not a finished product. Maybe he was not a game-changing shutdown corner. But he was still a young first-round talent with room to improve. And losing players like that always creates risk. Because if Arnold becomes successful somewhere else, Lions fans will naturally ask, did Detroit know something everyone else didn't know? Or did Detroit simply give up too soon? That is the uncomfortable question hanging over this entire situation. At the end of the day, every NFL decision comes down to one question. Is the player's ability worth the headache? Every franchise has to answer that question. The Lions decided the answer was no. They chose stability. They chose culture. They chose moving forward without uncertainty. And maybe that decision will look brilliant months from now. Maybe Detroit avoided a massive problem before it became a disaster. But if Terrion Arnold clears his situation, joins another team, and finally reaches the potential that made him a first-round selection, the conversation will change completely. Because then the Lions will not only be judged by who they kept, they will be judged by who they let go. And in the NFL, one mistake can define an entire offseason. The Terrion Arnold story is far from finished. The only question left is, will Detroit be remembered as the team that protected its future, or the team that accidentally gave away its next great cornerback?
Yo, mic check 1 to 2, -1, -2. Game over for this video, folks. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to stay in the huddle for more. This is NFL Madness, bringing the heat and signing out.